Hello, greetings, and welcome. I'm Brien Posey, and in this video I want to show you a few easy techniques for working with PowerShell output, particularly when you're dealing with objects in the pipeline. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to type a really common PowerShell commandlet called get service. And when I press enter, you can see that a number of pieces of information are returned by this command. I'll go ahead and scroll up a little bit. And you can see that we have a number of different records. Each one of these is a system service that is installed on this particular machine. So for each one, you can see the service name in the name column. You can see the status of that service, and you can see the service's display name. So this is an example of an object, and we can act on this object and retrieve individual pieces of information rather than having to look at the list as a whole. Now, this isn't unique to the get service commandlet. This is a very, very common principle within PowerShell. Let me show you another example. In this case, I'm going to type get process. And I'll press enter. And what I get is a list of all of the various processes that are running on this machine. So if I scroll up a little bit, you can see the handles for each process. And then we have some other pieces of information, such as the working set. That's the memory that the process is using, the CPU resources, the processor ID, the process name, and several other things. So the point being that very often PowerShell output is in object format, and you can look at those objects and extract very detailed information from them. I want to begin by showing you an extremely simple filtering technique. Let's suppose that rather than looking at every single process running on this machine, we wanted to look at the Explorer process. Now, obviously, you can see the Explorer process right here. We could simply look at it right there. But let's suppose that we didn't want to filter through the list and we just wanted to look at this one specific process. Well, what we could do in that case is to simply type the name of the process that we want to examine. Let me show you how this works. I'll type get process, and then I'll simply enter the name of the process. And when I do, I see that one specific process. Now, there are a number of other ways that we could filter this list and drill down and retrieve very specific pieces of information. Before I show you the various command line options, though, there's one other trick that I want to show you. And that's to use a command called Out-Gridview. Let me show you how this works. As you'll recall, when I type get process and just press enter without listing a specific process, I get a great big long list of all the processes that are running on this machine. Now, if I wanted to put this in a more usable format, then I can append the pipe symbol and the Out-Gridview commandlet. In PowerShell, the pipe symbol tells PowerShell that we want to take the output of one command and use it as input for the next command. So we're taking the output of the get process command, in other words, everything that you see above the command line, and then we're using that as import for the Out-Gridview command. The Out-Gridview command puts all of this information into an interactive table. Let me show you what this looks like. So here we have a list of all of the processes that are running on this machine, and it's in an interactive format. We could sort the various columns by clicking on them. We can also filter. You'll notice the Add Criteria button right here. So I could click on this button, and you'll notice a number of checkboxes relating to the columns that are being displayed. We can select a specific checkbox. I'll select CPUs. I'll click Add. And so then you can see Add CPUs contains, and if I click on contains, I have a number of different choices. Contains, does not contain, start with, equal, does not equal, ends with, is empty, is not empty. I'm just going to click on equals. And I'm just going to type 0.00 since we clearly have some processes that are using 0% CPU. So I'll type 0.00. And immediately we get a filtered list showing only those processes that have 0.00% CPU usage. So that's just a really quick example of how the Out-Gridview command works. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and drop back to the command line. Now, as I mentioned, there are a variety of techniques that we can use at the command line to perform similar types of filtering. So let's take a look at a few of those options. The first thing that I want to show you is that PowerShell has a lot more information available to it than what is shown by default. I showed you the get process commandlet already, and I showed you how you could type the name of an individual process if you only wanted to look at that one specific process. I'll type Explorer, and I'll press enter, and here we see some basic information related to the Explorer process. Now, the interesting thing is there's way more information available than what's shown on the screen right here. And this isn't unique to the get process commandlet. Most of the PowerShell commandlets that output information as an object will hide some of that information by default, and you can drill down into PowerShell and get access to that hidden information. So let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to repeat the command that I just typed, get process explorer, and then I'm going to type space and then the pipe symbol. Remember, the pipe symbol causes the output of one command to be used as input for the next command. So now we need a command after the pipe symbol. And the command that I'm going to use is select object. Now I could just type some column names, and the get process command would display just those columns of information. I'll show you an example of that in a moment. What I'm going to do for right now is press space and then type asterisk. And when I do that, what I'm going to see is all of the available information pertaining to the Explorer process. I'll go ahead and press enter. And when I do, you'll see a great big long list of information, but everything that you see is related to this one process. Not to all of the processes, but just the Explorer process. And as I scroll up, you can see how much information is truly being displayed. So we have a ton of information that's made available to us. Let's take a look at how to drill down into this information and see the information that we're really interested in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the command that I just typed, only this time, instead of using an asterisk, I'm going to type some specific column names. I'll start with process name. We already know we're working with the Explorer process, but in the real world, very often you'll be working with multiple processes. So let's use the process name. I'll add a comma, and then let's also include the working set. That's how much memory the process is using. I'll also add total processor time. And that will show us how much CPU resources this particular process is using. And then I'm going to add one more, threads. I'll press enter. And what we see is a filtered output. It shows us exactly those columns that I specified: process name, working set, total processor time, and threads. Now, incidentally, if you happen to do something like this and you end up with an empty column, it's possible no information exists for that column, but it's also possible that you made a spelling error. So if, for example, I were to repeat this command and I were to misspell threads, I'll just drop the S on the end. You'll notice that the threads column, which is misspelled as thread, is now empty. So that's why in many cases you may see that you're not getting visible output. But let me go ahead and put this back the way that it was. And there's something that I want to show you. So we can see the process name, we can see the working set memory, which there are ways of putting that into a more usable format, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. You can see the total processor time, but you'll notice that the threads column looks a little bit different. We have all of these numbers, and those numbers are in braces. So we have a brace right here, and then we have another one at the end right here, and then we have these three dots. Anytime that you see output from an object like this shown in braces and there's a series of dots, what that means is that PowerShell is hiding more information. So I already showed you how to use select object to get that information, but we're using select object right now. You can see we're using select object and then we're specifying threads as one of the objects. So if I were to simply type get process explorer, select object, threads, that wouldn't give me any more information than what we've already got. So the way that you would drill down into the threads or into any piece of information that is enclosed in braces and has the three dots is you have to expand the property. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to repeat the command that I just typed, but I'm going to do things just a little bit differently. I'm going to add expand property. and then I'll press enter, and we have all of this information that's generated. And remember, we're only looking at threads right now. And you can see how much information is truly there, and all of this was hidden. Okay, so that's a huge list of information. What if we wanted to narrow this down a little bit and look at a specific piece of information related to the threads? Well, what we could do in a situation like that is we could use a second select object command. Because remember, we've already expanded the threads property. So now, because it's expanded, we can use a normal select object command to look at individual attributes of the threads. So let me show you what I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is repeat the same command that I just typed. And then I'm going to append a pipe symbol. And then I'm going to type select object. And let's take a look at the object ID. I'll press enter. And so what I get is the object ID for every thread associated with the Explorer process. That's what I'm looking at right now. So let's move on and talk about some other ways that we can filter the output. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the get process commandlet again. And I already showed you how you could type the name of one specific process and get information related only to that process. For example, to get information related to the Explorer process, we would simply type Explorer, and now we have information related to the Explorer process. But we can also use a command called where_object to retrieve specific information. Let's take a look at how this works. I'm going to type get process, and then I'll use the pipe symbol, and then I'll type where_object, and then I'm going to type a brace, and then $__.name. So what the $__ does is it examines the current object. So in this case, we're examining the process object, and we're looking at the names of all of the various processes. So then I'll add a space, and then I'll add -eq, that's equals. So we're checking for a situation where the process name is equal to, and then I'll type Explorer, and then another brace, and I'll press enter, and we get the same result as before. Now, obviously, this was kind of a long way of getting exactly the same result that we could have gotten just by typing get process Explorer. But we can search on other things as well. We're not limited to just looking for the name. So we could use that exact same technique to filter on other pieces of information as well. Here's an example of how that might work. We're using the get process commandlet again, and I'm specifying where_object $__.handleCount. So we're checking the handle count for all of the process objects, and we're looking for a handle count that's equal to 2465. And you'll notice that I don't have quotes around 2465 because we're looking for a number rather than a string. I'll press enter. And we don't have any handle counts that are equal to that. So what I'll do is I'll type get process, Explorer, select -object, handle count. Sometimes the handle count changes. So right now it's 2460. So let's repeat the command before, and we'll change from 2465 to 2460. And now you can see that we've filtered by handle count. So let's take a look at some other techniques that we might use where we use where_object to do some filtering. I showed you how you could filter based on handle count and based on name, but what about CPU usage? What I'm going to do is I'm going to type get process, and then pipe symbol. So we're looking at all of the processes, and then I'm going to type where_object, and then brackets, $__.CPU, and we'll look for processes with CPU usage greater than 1000. So I'll type -GT for greater than. If we wanted to look for less than, it would be LT. I'll type 1000, and brackets, enter. So we have two processes with a CPU load of greater than 1000. So we can also filter on multiple conditions. So as you can see, we got two results when we checked to see which processes had a CPU load of greater than 1000. So just for the sake of demonstration, I don't know that you would ever necessarily want to do this in real life, but just for the sake of demonstration, let's filter based on CPU load and on process name. So if we're going to do a multi-condition property, then what we have to do is we have to put each individual condition in parentheses. So let's take a look at how that works. I'm going to add a parenthesis at the beginning right here, and I'll add another parenthesis at the end, so the brackets remain on the outside. And then I'm going to type space, and then because we're checking to see if two conditions are true, we're going to add dash and. We could use dash or, but I'm going to go with and. And then we need another parenthesis, and I'll use $_.name. And I'll check for a name that's equal to, so dash EQ, and I'll type system. And then we need a close parenthesis, and I'll press enter. And so we get one result. And that one result is the one process that meets our criteria. It has a process name of system, which you can see right here, and it has a CPU load greater than 1000. So that's how you filter on multiple conditions. So one last thing that I want to show you is ForEach Loops. I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen just to get rid of some of the clutter. Now, ForEach Loops can be used in a variety of different ways, but they're really useful because they can go through an object and look at one item within that object at a time. So for example, when we typed get process, each individual process was an item within the list of processes. We could use a ForEach loop to take action on each individual process. But I'm going to switch things up just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable. I'll call this $colors. And I'm going to set this equal to a few different colors. And it looks like I made a typo, so let me go ahead and correct that. I'll press enter. And what we've done is created a variable called colors that contains 4 different colors. So if I type $colors, PowerShell shows me the contents of that variable, in this case red, green, blue, yellow, and each one is displayed on a separate line because each one of these colors is a separate item. And just to prove that these are indeed separate items, I'm going to type $colors just like I did before, but I'm going to append period count. And that's going to show me how many individual items. So we have 4 colors, and then PowerShell shows us the number 4, indicating that each color is indeed being treated as a separate item. So now that we have a collection of items, let's take a look at how a ForEach loop works. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type ForEach, and then I'm going to type parenthesis, and then $color. Now notice that I'm using $color, not $colors, which is the variable that I declared a moment ago. $color is a brand new variable, and I could call this anything that I wanted. I'm just going with color for the sake of clarity. So $color, and then in $colors with an S, and then close parentheses. So I'm creating a loop that's going to look at each individual color within my list of colors. That's what this line does. And then I'll put a brace, and then we have to tell PowerShell what action to take. We could do absolutely anything that we want here, but just in the interest of keeping things simple, I'm just going to output the color name. So I'm going to type write host, and write host is the PowerShell commandlet for displaying information on the screen, and then $color, and then a closing brace. So what we're essentially doing is creating a loop that's going to go through that list of colors, and it's going to deal with each color individually, and it's going to write that color by name to the screen. And you can see that it does that. Now, obviously, this isn't all that exciting. The output looks exactly the same as when I just typed the $colors variable name. If I were to do that right now, it looks exactly like what I just did. So just to kind of underscore the idea that we truly are dealing with each item individually, let's go ahead and add one more thing to the mix. So I'm going to repeat the command that I just typed. So here's the command that we used a moment ago, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the write host command a little bit. Rather than ending it with write host color, I'm going to add dash foreground color, $color. So assuming that I haven't made any typos, what this command should do is it should display the list of colors just as it did before, but we're going to display each color name in the color that it's indicated. So I'll go ahead and press enter. And now you can see red is displayed in red, green is displayed in green, blue is displayed in blue, and yellow is displayed in yellow. So we truly are taking an action on each item in this list. So that's just a quick rundown of some of the filtering options that exist in PowerShell for pipeline objects. And there are many, many, many more techniques than what I've been able to cover in this video. But this was just designed to give you a taste of some of the things that are possible to help you get started. So with that said, I'm Brien Posey. Thanks for watching.